You're watching Sky News, the top stories this hour. England are now preparing for their first European Championship semi-final for 25 years after reaching the last four with a 4-0 win over Ukraine. The Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, has told Sky News that the government plans to make mask wearing a personal choice and no longer mandatory when it reaches the next stage in its roadmap out of lockdown. And at least 17 people have died after a military aeroplane missed a runway and crashed in the Philippines. Next week, Boris Johnson will spell out whether COVID restrictions in England will end on the 19th of July. So far, government indications are that most, if not all, lockdown measures will be lifted. But this week has been pretty eventful for politics. And here to talk it over are Anna Mikhailova, the Deputy Political Editor and Columnist at the Mail on Sunday, and Sonia Sodha, Chief Leader Writer at The Observer and former Senior Policy Advisor to Ed Miliband. Anna, Sonia, thank you so much for joining us. Sonia, let's start with you. What do you think? Personal choice, how's that going to work?
Well, I think personal choice and personal responsibility is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to some COVID measures. And I think a really important example of that is masks. So we're hearing this weekend that the government might drop masks being compulsory on public transport, in shops from the 19th of July. But masks are one of those measures where we wear masks to protect other people, if you're talking about the surgical type of mask. So it's not really about personal responsibility. It's about taking a collective decision that masks are a low harm, low cost intervention that we can all take collectively together. We make them compulsory in public spaces. And in doing so, we help keep infection rates down. And seeing as that's the best way to keep schools running normally, it's very, very hard to understand the government not making masks compulsory from the 19th of July on the table.
Couldn't it be a personal responsibility to the community? Anna, what do you make of it?
Well, I think this is all part of a much broader shift in government policy, that they want to take it away from top-down rules that we have had imposed for over a year now and put it into the hands of individual people. So, I mean, I think it could work, obviously, if people have made a behavioural change towards wearing masks as a more normal thing. For example, as we saw in Asian countries, where people, when they have a cold, they will wear a mask. It's both thoughtful and it's responsible. And that is sort of the idea. I mean, we heard the JCVI advisor earlier this morning saying that is exactly what he's going to do himself. He's going to wear them, not all the time, but if he's feeling ill or if he's in an enclosed space with lots of people. So it's sort of making it a judgment call, as opposed to if you go into an empty shop right now, you have to wear it even if you've got no one around. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense. I think the problem with all of this, and as Sonia identifies, is have we been wearing masks long enough for it to really become second nature to do these things and to take a more responsible approach when needed? I mean, we'll see after the July 19th when they no longer become mandatory, because you really hope that we learn from these things, that when people are ill, they don't go into the office anymore and don't start spreading it to their colleagues, that they might wear a mask out and about. But, you know, it's not clear whether people actually will do that.
SPI-B, the SAGE committee, they've responded to this and also to what Sajid Javid has been saying in the papers. Stephen Riker said it is frightening in a tweet to have a health secretary who still thinks COVID is flu, who's unconcerned at levels of infection, who doesn't realise that those who do best for health also do best. There we go. Well, that's another one in response to the one I'm reading. So also do best for the economy. Who wants to dish all protections while only half of us are vaccinated? And the next tweet from Robert West goes really plays into what you were saying, Sonia. It's like having a government that thinks road safety should be completely up to individual responsibility. No traffic lights, no highway code, no law about driving on the left, no crash barriers. Absolutely bonkers. Because before, obviously, it wasn't law to wear masks. I mean, how do you think it's going to play out this time, Sonia?
Well, I think that's incredibly strong critique from two behavioural scientists who are on the government's one of the government's advisory committees on this. And I think the fact that scientists are coming out who are on these committees and criticising the government so strongly shows very much actually that this is not a decision that would be grounded in public health or in science or a concern, for example, to keep schools running normally as much as possible. What it is really about politicking, and the fact that the cabinet have got backbench MPs, in fact some members of the cabinet, who just want to drop every rule, no matter what the cost is. I agree with Anna that eventually, we will move to a world where mask wearing is optional and it's something you do. But that moment is not when the Delta variant is still increasing sharply, when schools, 1 in 20 school kids are home self-isolating, and when not everybody has been double vaccinated yet. So it just feels like a really strange decision from a public health perspective. And I think the fact that the government's scientific advisors are coming out and criticising them so strongly really does show that this is not a decision about public health. It's a decision about politics and keeping backbench MPs happy.
Anna, what do you think? Do you think it is about the data, or do you think it's politics?
Well, I think it's a broad sense of direction, because masks is only one of the things that Boris Johnson is expected to announce. He's also going to scrap bubbles in schools. He's going to say that double jab people can start to go on holiday to amber list countries. I mean, this is all part of a broad picture of opening up and trying to give people responsibility themselves, and also making the most of the vaccine program, which has been successful, and to try and point out that, yes, we are going to have to live with COVID. As Stephen Powell said this morning, it is going to become an endemic disease, but that doesn't mean that we have to have these top-down, legally enforced restrictions. I remember a year ago when the whole debate about masks started, and ministers were so keen to not have them and to sort of almost deny the data that was coming out in support of them. I think masks is sort of a slightly bizarre thing. They're seen as symbolic and perhaps not treated as effective as I think we've seen they are. But all of this is a much bigger picture. So moving towards individual responsibility, individual decisions, as opposed to state-enforced laws.
We've always heard that they are following the science. We've had the head of the BMA come out and say, as case numbers continue to rise at an alarming rate due to the rapid transmission of the Delta variant and an increase in people mixing with one another, it makes no sense to remove restrictions in their entirety in just over 2 weeks' time. I mean, is it wise, Anna?
Well, I think the reason they're being removed, as set out in the roadmap, is because, yes, there is a rise in cases, but that's not being translated into a significant rise in deaths. So the link between cases, hospitalizations and deaths has been broken by the vaccine program, which, of course, is the whole point of why we've had this huge drive to vaccinate everyone. And it's been done very successfely. And now the idea is to reap the benefits of that and trying to go back to a more normal situation. If, as Sajid Javid, who writes in the Mail on Sunday today, points out, you can't start putting everything on the back burner. You can't keep cancelling routine operations. You can't keep a backlog on the NHS, which now exceeds 5 million. You can't keep doing this just because of one disease when we have so many other diseases to look at. So that is why there's this shift. That is why that now that the vaccination program has shown it is successful, the idea is you move to a different system. And of course, Sonia mentioned schools. So the point being made by scientific advisors about schools now is the system we have in place right now with bubbles and being sent home to self-isolate is completely disastrous, because you're having children miss so much school time just because someone is positive in their bubble. And they have to just sit home, even when the teachers are vaccinated, the parents are vaccinated. So I think this is the 2-week point is really important, because there are certain things that really do need to be urgently changed to adapt to, yes, a rising new wave. But as the scientists have pointed out, let's say we have this third wave as expected in the summer, and there are lots of cases, but we keep the old policies. What we'll have millions of children missing school while deaths are actually pretty stable and not rising. That doesn't make any sense. That's why and a lot of people wanted to go faster, but that's why the July 19th deadline is, as the government's saying, being stuck to.
OK, well, let's leave COVID and those restrictions now and turn to that by-election we had this week in Batley and Spen. Sonia, your reaction there, a Labour win, but only by 323 votes. A
win is a win, I guess. And I think the point for Labour is they defied expectations. expectations. So expectations weren't that great for Labour. I think a lot of people thought that they would lose a seat to the Conservatives. So it is very good, I think, for the party. I think Kim led better for a really positive, constructive, unifying campaign. Huge toxicity was brought into Batley and Spen by George Galloway. We had reports of people associated with him kind of, verbally abusing Kim Ledbetter, sort of chasing her. I know he's dissociated himself from that. But there is no question that he brought a lot of toxicity into the campaign. And she managed to run a positive, constructive campaign and still win, despite the fact that George Galloway took a lot of votes off Labour. So I think it is overall a very positive story for Labour. I don't think it completely takes away the long-term structural questions about Labour's future, about Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer's leadership, but it definitely gives him a reprieve over the summer and takes away the immediate questions about whether he could continue as leader of the Labour Party.
Anna, what do you think? Because that's exactly what a lot of people are saying, isn't it? That yes, it was a very local campaign, a very strong another strong local leader for the Labour Party, but still we're left with big questions as to what exactly the Labour Party stands for under Keir Starmer.
Well, the next big question off the back of Batley is, what does Keir Starmer do now? Is he going to actually consolidate his position within the party? Because in the run-up, we had so much talk of leadership contests, calls from the left and right of his party saying that he should consider resigning if he loses Batley, talk of Angela Rayner as an opponent. And of course, his position has been, as Sonia says, he's won this seat, he's held this seat, it's been strengthened. So will he now use that to try and do something about these voices, dissenting voices in his own party? Is he going to try and strengthen his position? And essentially, instead of trying to straddle between two stools of trying to appeal both to the right and left wings of the party, is he going to continue what has been obviously a drift more towards a New Labour type of direction and do something about the far left that continues to try and undermine his leadership?
Sonia, what do you think? Do you think that had they not won, he would be facing a leadership challenge?
No, because I think that, there was lots of talk going into the by-election about this, but I don't think that any potential challenger had the number of MPs that it would be required to mount a leadership challenge. So although you've got factions in the party, particularly, the far left faction, sort of grumbling and talking about this, they didn't have the numbers. And I do think there is a case of, there's at this point of opposition, at this stage of a parliament, the Labour Party has always been a very broad church. There have always been grumblings on one side or the other. So I don't think that he would have faced a leadership challenge, no, even if he had lost. But I think it's helpful because I think the victory helps sort of put to bed those questions. And a lot of people who'd have still been sort of talking to the press, grumbling about it, sort of speculating about leadership challenges, I think that stuff will go away for a while now.
Anna, what do you make of this policy platform, really, to make, sell and buy more in Britain? I suppose it is a policy, but again, not really broad, as it were, in terms of where the Labour Party is and what it stands for.
Well, it is part of a broad signal that Keir Starmer is trying to make, that there's quite a big focus on patriotism, on this selling to British companies, giving contracts to British companies. The way he referenced England's game when he won in Batley, there's this sort of trying to point out that he loves the country, and obviously moving away from things that were said about Jeremy Corbyn. I find the British companies policy actually quite interesting. I mean, the thing that it reminds me of is Margaret Thatcher's Buy British First. It's a sort of it's an interesting direction, and particularly for Rachel Reeves to launch it with an interview in the Sunday Telegraph of all the papers as well. I find it as a curious signal to where Labour is going.
Okay. Anna, Sonia, have a good weekend. Thanks a lot.